So I'm Dr. John Austin. This is Dr. Nicole Gravina. And the idea here is that we found ourselves talking to each other, and our colleague Bob Cummins, who is also on the phone here, he's not on video today, but he's joined as a participant, and we'll call on him a couple of times today. But the three of us and others in our kind of network have been talking about, what we're seeing in organizations, in our clients and friends and others who are leaders, and what people are dealing with during this coronavirus outbreak. And we know this is a difficult time for everyone. And so, we've got parents who are homeschooling suddenly. For some people, it's a welcome change. Some people like that. Some people are good at it. Janelle, our friend who's on the line, is super good at homeschooling. So I've been getting some tips from her. We've got others who have to go to work, who can't stay home and can't social distance as well. And so we're, they're struggling with other things, right? So we wanted to just bring together a community of people and start talking about, from a behavioral science perspective, what can we add? What can we do? What can we offer to the community during this difficult time? So that's really the intent here. If you've seen our webinars before, they're usually, I would suggest, very thoughtful and well-planned and well-practiced. But this is the first run, okay? So, we're kind of out here without a net today. We've got some ideas that we're going to talk about, but we're really going to kind of discuss a lot of them. And a lot of it's going to be based on a recent blog that Dr. Nicole Gravina wrote with Jessica Nastasi. So I shared a link regarding that, or on that blog, where you can read the actual blog, but we're going to dive into some more detail around that today. Plus anything you guys have on your minds that you'd like us to talk about. But let me get us started here. If you haven't done this and you've just come into the room, chat in the chat box where you're calling from, and go to the question box and type in any of the biggest challenges that you're facing when it comes to people and the coronavirus prevention activities. So who are we? Nicole and I have worked together for many years now. And so I talk about, us as in Nicole and I have taught leaders, thousands of leaders in these organizations and others in 12 countries around the world, how to use behavioral science and to create safer working environments, safer and more effective working environments. I was also a professor for 15 years at Western Michigan University, and that's where Nicole and I met. And let me hand it over to Nicole. She can say a couple of things about herself as well.
Yeah, so as John said, we've worked together for a number of years, and I'm currently on faculty at University of Florida, and I do behavioral science research in organizations, trying to find ways to help them influence behavior in the desired direction. So this is a good topic for us to talk about. Yeah,
great. Why did you get into behavioral science?
That's a good question. I get asked that a lot, and I really think it probably has to do with just, first of all, seeing my working parents. My dad worked at General Motors on the line and came home and talked about some of the struggles that they had there with, leadership, safety, that kind of stuff. And my mom also worked for the state of Michigan, so a different environment, but I just heard about that stuff growing up. And then I also I was kind of I was interested in science. And when I learned about behavioral science, it really resonated with me because it is a more scientific approach to influencing behavior. So. Yeah,
excellent. Yeah, I have similar background. I mean, where, I grew up in a blue collar family and was the only person to go to college, and saw people working for a living, making fun of me liking books and all.
Mm-hmm. Same here. Yep.
And then, but wanted to help. That's the whole reason. Right. There's a science where we can prevent injuries, and we know how to do this. And we know how to create a more effective work environment. It's just a matter of sharing it out with enough people and educating people enough. Nicole is also an excellent coach, and she is the lead coach in my course, my online course called Behavioral Safety Leadership Academy. And we're just in the middle of launching that right now as well. I'm happy to share more information about that with you guys if you'd like. So let's move on. I put together kind of along with Nicole a list of challenges that we're hearing about from clients and from organizations that we work with and leaders that we're working with and talking to. And we're not going to cover these per se, but I don't know. Do these sound familiar to you? Is the question, and you can chat responses if this cues more for you that we've left off, but. Things like, I'm hearing organizations that have daily decisions that have dramatically multiplied. Like, so in other words, they're forced to make lots more decisions, like on the order of 4 or 5 times more decisions during the day now. They're having, in fact, one organization said they're having multiple meetings daily. So their executive team and senior leaders get together twice a day. And in the morning, they can't even predict what's going to happen in the afternoon half the time, right? So they can't even set the agenda because things are so new and they're so rapidly evolving. Questions and meeting agendas change within the day. Communications with employees 1 to 2 times daily, sometimes more. These are just kind of more blanket communications. But communications between supervisors and employees have dramatically increased or need to dramatically increase as well. So lots of email, lots of written communication, and then I'm seeing organizations using video and recorded video more than they ever have, and live video as well. Social distancing, obviously, as many salaried folks working from home as possible. I'm hearing challenges with figuring out who can work from home and who can't, and different strategies there. Some organizations are saying, like, look, if you can work from home, just do it. Work it out with your supervisor. Others are saying, like, well, we've got a process for figuring out whether you can work from home or not. Childcare is a challenge, especially among hourly workforce who have to be there, maybe at the work face producing products. And in fact, in our community in Kalamazoo, there's a challenge with kids who, don't have enough to eat at home. And so, that's outside of work, but it's related, right? It's all, the whole person comes to work, right? If your kids aren't getting enough food, that's a major problem and a major distraction and far more important than work in most people's lives, right? So, we've got the school district is delivering food a few times a week in a variety of neighborhoods, and, not checking IDs or anything, just like giving out food, which, is the right thing to do, I think. We've got organizations saying their product's being turned away at the client. So they ship the product all the way to the client and the client says, no, sorry, you can't come in. You've got to go deliver it somewhere else. Right. And you've got some closures in organizations. You've got supply chain problems getting the product, or maybe you're part of a supply chain that's a larger supply chain, and that disruption to that is causing problems. We've got required workforce reduction. In some states now, the governors are getting involved and requiring you to reduce your workforce by 50% or some other number. Just one more page here, just so you can see the extent to which this is changing our habits and changing our environment at work. Breaks typically happen at a certain part, and so that they're kind of creating an environment where people are more likely to be separate. Others painting lines on the floor to show where you should walk and you shouldn't walk so that you can maintain distance, and giving visual cues. Some are limiting meetings to 10 minutes and in open areas. Some are communicating by Zoom even when they're on the same floor. Coaching employees who have symptoms, that's a whole thing that people are struggling with. They're coaching leaders on how to handle those conversations. When you need to send people home because of symptoms, do you give them extra pay or do you give them extra paid time off? In some countries, that's not as big of a concern, but in the U.S., that's a huge concern, because you get the number of days off, and then beyond that, you don't get paid, right? In many organizations. So and then careful messaging about spending. So organizations want to be careful about what they're spending, but leaders don't want to send panic messages. Right. So some of my construction.
I'm just going to check in for those that have John frozen. Can you still hear me? It looks like he's going to pop out and then try to pop back in. And so John was just going through that list of things that we're hearing that people are struggling with in their organizations right now. And I think he made a really good point that this has completely altered our environments. You know, for many people, both at work and at home, we're seeing just major changes in our environment. And that automatically is going to create some change in behavior. And we want to make sure that the changes that it's creating are, you know, hopefully in a way that are good for people, good for the employees and the organization altogether. So I think that our next slide, let's see if I can pull it up here. Our next slide is really just talking a little bit about some of the strategies that we've seen actually for a number of years in behavioral science. It's interesting as this came up and people are talking about trying to increase hand washing and trying to decrease face touching like I just did and that kind of stuff. We actually have a lot of research on this, and we've had it since, you know, the 70s and 80s. People have been doing work in this area. And so for us, it kind of cued, you know, there are a lot of solutions already out there for people, and we can share them so that people can use them. So when we talk about some of these things, the first one, I had shared that blog post that I wrote with my doctoral student, Jessica Anastasi, and we talked about some of the basics that people are talking about right now, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. And as you all you feel free to continue to post questions and make comments. I'm happy to respond to that as you are as you're listening. So so I moved on to this part where we're going to just talk about some of these strategies. And the first one that we plan to talk about was hand hygiene. And we don't want to pretend to be experts in communicable diseases, right? Like, we are not the CDC. And that's something really important and something we always talk to our clients about. Our expertise is not what you should do, so how you should hand wash. The CDC is telling you how to hand wash, but our expertise is then in getting people to do those things that are being recommended. And so when we think about hand hygiene and really any behaviors that we want people to do that they haven't been consistently doing before, with hand hygiene, it's probably the case that most people wash their hands at least some of the time, right? But they might not do it correctly. So the CDC recommends hand washing for at least 20 seconds and also making sure you have friction on every part of your hand. So we want to make sure people are doing that. And the science tells us that when we just tell people to do things, it doesn't have much influence on their behavior. The way that we can influence their behavior, if we want to first make sure that they're doing it correctly, is really to show them. And that's a little bit of a challenge, right, in the current environment. But if we can kind of walk people through exactly what we want to see, maybe even model it for them, make sure that they're really clear on what the expectations are, then I think that can help to make sure that they're doing it correctly. The second thing that we want to do really for any of these behaviors that we want to change is we want to make it as easy as possible for them. So in general, in behavioral science, we know that the easier we make things for people, the more likely it is that they will do it. And there's sort of a kind of a continuum on that. So the easier it gets, then it's even more likely that they'll do it. And so some things that you can do for hand hygiene would be to make hand sanitizer readily available. There's been research studies that have shown that if you put the hand sanitizer right next to people, then they're likely to use it regularly. And if they have to walk even across the room or outside of the room, then they're much less likely to use it. There was a study that was conducted with college students where they had hand sanitizers. I think they were attached to the walls in the cafeteria, and they had 0% use. And then they put them on the tables, and it went up to 60% of the students were hand sanitizing around lunchtime. So, just one small change, like making it a little bit closer to people, will make it more likely that they'll do it. When you think about making it, yeah, go ahead.
Can I interrupt for a sec?
Sure.
There's a question regarding this, and by the way, I can't. When I got knocked off the call, I lost all the questions that were typed in. Yep. So you and Janelle will have to kind of bring some of those back around. But I do see the latest one, and that was involving not having enough hand sanitizers on construction sites, as well as not everyone trying to maintain the same hygiene methods. So, you have any thoughts about those?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I guess what I would think about, if I'm trying to make that easier for people and there's not enough around the construction sites, then maybe one strategy would be to give people breaks where they could go and hand sanitize at the sink with soap and water. So again, as we're trying to make it easier, we want to like give them time. So this is your time to go hand wash. Make sure that you go do it. And that's going to take a little bit of time away from, their actual work time, but it will help improve the health of the group. So that's one idea that I could think of if there's not enough. Do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing construction clients say, we've got to build in hand wash stations or hand wash capability. Yeah. And so, I mean, hand sanitizer. Now, again, this is not. I'm a doctor, but not a medical doctor. This is medical advice. But my understanding is hand sanitizing is actually less effective than hand washing with soap if you properly wash. Yeah. And so like building in hand wash stations is probably a much better solution than having sanitizer around. Although there is cost and there are space requirements and there may be, problems getting water there and stuff like that. You're required to have a certain number of porta potties, at least on US construction sites, per person. And so hand wash stations can be built in as well in many cases.
Yeah. So. Yeah. That's a great suggestion. Good. So another thing with hand hygiene, a lot of the research that has tried to improve it has looked at providing feedback on hand hygiene. And what they have done in the research is just had someone go out, collect some data. And if you're doing this in your workplace, you could do it pretty informally, just walk around. And when people at points that they should be washing hands before they eat, before they transition to a new area, then you can just, make a check mark. Yes, they did it, or no, they didn't. And then provide feedback to the workforce on that. So that feedback is a pretty powerful tool. Now, it definitely takes time for people to be able to, collect data and deliver feedback, but I don't think this has to be something that is really time consuming. I think that it could just be 5 or 10 minutes a day. You walk around and take some data on it and then give feedback to everyone. And I would probably do this as anonymous public feedback. So I'd probably say something like, you could post it up or you could send an email to the group and say, hey guys, I saw 60% of people washing their hands and we're trying to shoot for 100%. So let's see if we can improve it tomorrow.
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, there are other things that we know will probably work, although I'm not sure there are research studies on it. Like, prompting sometimes can work, right? Yeah. And this might not be with your own workforce, but it might even be if you're out and about and you see someone who should be washing their hands but doesn't. Part of this is reducing the spread of illness. It's not just about yourself not getting sick. It's also other people, right? It's also, you getting it. And I was talking to Bob Cummins this morning about this, and he pointed out like a lot of people are missing that point, the connection between like you being a contagion. So I was just thinking the other day, my wife was in a medical setting, sort of semi-medical setting, not really like not with doctors, but it was kind of an outpatient clinic, dealing with some other kind of tangential issues, not like super medical. But anyway, the person was touching her and didn't wash her hands. And then she said something to the person and the person, like, she went over and washed her hands for about like 2 seconds. And then my wife was like, no, that's not how you do it, and she's like one that will speak up, but like many of us would feel weird speaking up in that situation. But we do know that speaking up actually can make a big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I also think that we can do that stuff sort of obviously. So let's say you're in a medical setting like that. When the medical provider walks in, you could wash your hands, and that would probably create a little bit of discomfort for the medical provider if they didn't also wash their hands, right? So if you don't feel comfortable being the one to say, like, you need to wash your hands right now, you could just then go do it, and they could see you do it, and that might influence their behavior. But I agree. So prompts in general, we can do that verbally. Sometimes people post signs, and signs aren't super effective, but we do know that they do help at least improve behavior a little bit, maybe temporarily. And then it gives you an opportunity to say thanks for washing your hands when people are doing that. There was one study where supervisors emailed staff to remind them to wash their hands regularly, and about 2/3 of them started washing their hands when they were supposed to. Wow. Just from email reminders. So, there are ways that we can make sure people remember. And I think that if you can build it into the workday, so you think about habits that we have. If you get into your car and you put on your seatbelt, it feels unnatural to get in and not put in your seatbelt if you're someone who wears it all the time. And we want the same thing to happen with hand washing. So we want it to be that people, that parts of the environment cue it. Every time I use the restroom or I touch somebody or whatever, then I wash my hands, right? And that just requires at first some extra support. So we get reminders, maybe we have reminders on our phone, our peers are reminding us, that kind of thing. And over time, then the environment will take over and influence our behavior every time we're in that situation.
Yeah, excellent. Great points. Do you want to, I stopped sharing so that we could, see more video. I think the next topic was on cleaning. You want to kind of move down the list here, and then we'll take more questions from people. There are a number of questions already. And I'll try to kind of break in with the questions that are related to what you're talking about.
Yeah, that sounds great. So for cleaning, I think this also goes back to, we need to make it really clear what we expect from people. And there's different ways to clean. Like you could just use a wet paper towel and wipe something up. What do you want them to do? And we want to really clarify for people. And pretty much every cleaning study that has been done has used a checklist. And on the checklist, it's simple, but it does tell people what they should do. And you can hang it on the wall in the room. You could laminate it, and people could use a whiteboard marker to check off when they've done those items. So they're sort of self-monitoring that it's gotten done. If you can have pictures of what things should look like, and how you should do it, that can help too, to kind of encourage the cleaning behavior. And again, back to the feedback, I think that we could have supervisors check in, make sure that people are cleaning the way that they're supposed to, but you could also do that with peers. I think in this environment, most people understand how important it is for us to reduce the spread of illness. And so I think that we could probably create kind of a peer support system where peers can say, hey, check in on this, tell me if you think this looks good enough, and you could do that for each other. And that social kind of feedback would be likely to get people to do a good job with it.
Yeah, great points. To Nicole's point, there are lots of studies showing how to improve cleaning. Mm-hmm. Something I want to reiterate that Nicole said earlier is, I think about this as like the universe of recommendations in the coronavirus. Involves the World Health Organization, CDC in the U.S., major organizations that are medically trained. They have particular recommendations, and those result in procedures or processes that they recommend doing, and that should be your what. Right. And what we're talking about here is how to get the what to happen. Mm-hmm. Right. And so there are lots of studies on cleaning that we could happily share with you. But as Nicole said, almost all of them involve checklists. Almost all of them involve feedback in some way, and maybe modeling, sometimes photos, pictures of what good looks like and stuff like that. But let's take a specific example here. And maybe some of you guys, I'd like to hear from you guys on the chat, maybe. Is anyone facing this? Because one of my clients had, they still got people working in the office. And if they're going to have a meeting or if someone's going to use a meeting room, what they were having people do was kind of wipe down everything in the room, the table, the phone, anything that anyone touched, the doorknobs and stuff like that, with like Clorox wipes and stuff like that. Now, I don't know if that's compliant with what the WHO would recommend or not, but I noticed that it wasn't happening because I'd be in the room and not see anyone. You know, this was before social distancing really took effect there. And I was seeing people not doing it. So I don't know. Is anyone else struggling with stuff like that? Are you struggling with cleaning and specific? Are there specific elements of cleaning that you're struggling with or challenged with? Go ahead and chat something on that if you've got anything to share with us. And we can kind of continue to move on here. Let's talk about social distancing a little bit.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So there are workplaces that still need to keep working. People still need to be there, right? There are plenty of us that can work from home, but there are also people who are, you know, making sure that the food is in the grocery store and we can go there and buy it. Doctors' offices, you know, people still have to work. And so one of the recommendations that the CDC has issued is for people to distance socially and be at least 6 feet away from each other while they're at work. And this is a lot different than our normal routine, right? And so we need to think about ways to reduce that. And I think the first thing that we need to do is identify when do people have contact with each other during the workday. So you could just sit down and think, okay, what are all the times that we are less than 6 feet away from other people? And once you do that, then it gives you a starting point to brainstorm how to make some adjustments in the way that you're doing work to reduce that. So for example, you talked about meetings. Maybe the meetings could be over Zoom, or you could meet in a conference room where people can be distanced from each other. And that would be one strategy to use with that.
Yeah, great points. I also saw, you know, we all know awareness building is not the most effective way, but like in conjunction with other things, it can help to open people's eyes a little bit. I just saw one of our colleagues, Allison Reynolds, today on LinkedIn just shared a great infographic that I didn't have time to grab because I saw it just before the meeting, but it lays out, you know, if you operate with zero social distancing, you know, one person can infect over 5 days of interacting with people. One person infects up to 406 other people. So like that's normal operating procedures. If you reduce your exposure to people by 50%, that one person infects only 15 people. And if you reduce your exposure to people by 75%, that one person infects only 2.5 other people. So like you've got this like massive logarithmic kind of function, you know, that happens. And that's really what they're talking about, you know, on a day-to-day basis. With you know, when people are saying like flatten the curve, like that's the thing that will work. Now there was a question here from a couple of different people, Bob Cummins included. Some people don't seem to have the same understanding of social distancing as I do. Why is that? Is there anything that you could say about that?
Why? I don't know. I think I would have to meet each of those people to actually identify why for each of them. I do think that what you said about the awareness campaign, the more that people are sharing information that's simple and easy to consume. So I think like the visuals are really important to help people understand how their behavior will influence others. I saw another thing shared recently where it was there were dots moving, and it showed if everyone was moving how quickly people would get ill, and if it was most people were not moving but one person was moving, that it was less there was less spread. So if there's different like simple ways for us to help communicate this to people, then I think that will help improve the understanding that this is an important thing to do.
Yeah, that's a great point. Hey Bob, I've unmuted you. Do you have anything to add to that?
Hey guys, so it's from personal experience, this difference with social distancing. And there's a couple of reasons I think why there's confusion. One of them is the word social. I think some people have just seen it as, well, that means out with work, as in I only need to distance myself from the socializing aspect. And another is the vagueness or the ambiguity around it. So it's not, although social distancing sounds like a behavior, it's not a behavior, it's a label. So, so it's what would it then look like? And I think, as you've mentioned already with the hand washing, Nicole, modeling, you can't beat modeling. What does social distancing look like? Model the correct behavior for the people that are in your organization. And I think that's where some of the misunderstanding comes from, if you like, of just not really fully understanding the actual behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to understand how your own behavior is influencing others. So you might think, I'm not sick, and because you can't see the transfer of illness, it's the consequences aren't that clear to people. So that probably makes it difficult for them too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, and as a leader, if someone's not practicing it, what do you say, and how do you have that conversation? Right? I mean, and you might be able to have that conversation, but what about all the leaders who report to you in your organization? Like, these are the things that kind of fascinate me in terms of behavior change. Like, how do we it's not just, we know very well from the science and from the practice that just asking leaders to have conversations doesn't work. Even when they're positive conversations and they're not possibly confrontational. So so back to Bob for a second, because Bob is an expert on conversations, and we've used his conversation cards and different tools to help leaders have more effective conversations in the organization. And by the way, I didn't introduce Bob. Bob is the director at SODAC, and they're a consultancy that helps leaders create safer, more effective work environments. And he's a good friend and colleague in our behavioral science network. And anyway, so back to Bob for a second. Do you have any suggestions for people on what might work to get those critical conversations to happen? When somebody sees another person who's not complying either with hand washing or social distancing or any other recommended requirements?
Yeah. So I guess this is like no different from a lot of the wishful thinking around safety about intervening, and calling unsafe behavior out, and the way in which we've handled that in the past hasn't been that effective, as in in the industry, when we've just sent out the requirement, you can challenge people when you see something wrong, and then we get frustrated it doesn't happen. And this is no different. So the starting place has to be different. It has to come from a place of permission from the individual that might be challenged. So for example, if I want to not touch my face, I give you permission to call me out every time you see me touching my face. Mm-hmm. And that way I'm asking for your help, and I might still be slightly annoyed if you call it out, only because I've not managed to do it properly, but at least I'm coming from that position of asking for help rather than not even giving you permission. And I think that's where we've made the mistake in the past as well. We've not even set it up right of the worker giving permission to be called out. I feel like, just forced it upon them. So, we've done with this with the kids in our house of, let's call me out, guys. So we've actually modeled that behavior first. Call me out if you see me not washing my hands. If you see me just coming in the house and just coming in and talking to you, say to me, "Have you washed your hands yet, Bob?" And that kind of thing. And it works. And then they're okay if you call them out. Then it is. So it's this mutual beneficial help that you're trying to create. This everybody gets collective responsibility in its true form. We've got the opportunity to learn lots of kind of new ways of communicating from a helping, nurturing point of view with what's going on just now that will help us in other ways once we get over this.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Bob. Thanks for sharing that. It cued a couple things for me that, we've all seen the video of the politicians giving there's a Washington Post video of the politicians talking about reducing face touching and then touching their face. And every time in this video, every time they do, there's a ding, And so I find myself, when I touch my face, I go ding. And wouldn't it be funny if among friends you could do that ding, every time. Like we used to have, Nicole and Bob and I used to have a group of people who we would interact with, and like every time there was a good idea, somebody would say ding, So like you can create things like that and add them to the environment that actually will dramatically change behavior. The first time, it's all in how you do it. You don't want to, if you can avoid it, you don't want to make it threatening. I remember when I first started teaching, I said a lot, and a lot, as most people do when they first start public speaking. And I still do quite a bit, but it was a very high rate when I first started. And so now I'm very focused on but so the person who I worked with, the faculty mentor who I had, the professor said, all right, well, I can fix that. Okay, all right, fine. And so he said, can I come to your class next time you teach? Sure, no problem. So he comes to the class and I'm teaching, and he gets a chair and he sits at the front of the room behind me. I'm facing the class, and he's, just looking at me, crosses his legs, and he pulls out a clicker. And every time, like an animal training clicker, every time that I said, he would go click, click, and everyone could hear it, right? It's in the entire class, right? And it eliminated it for a good bit. And so, if it's highly aversive like that, it can make it go away pretty quickly. But the point here is that providing that immediate feedback, it's changing the environment. And that's what really impacts the behavior. And that's the key to all these things. So.
Yeah. And I think Bob made a really good point in just that the leaders in the organization need to start by being the first ones to give people permission to correct their behavior, because then it becomes a little bit easier for them to do it in the other direction. And another thing I was thinking about as he was talking about this, I've heard a few people in organizations sort of, in a fun way, they've talked about different things to do to interact with each other. So they would, like a group of women did like a distance air hug and like an air high five and thumbs up. Probably not going to do that on a construction site, but there could be other ways that people could kind of replace what they would have done before with new sort of fun behaviors. And I think that can be something that can create some awareness among the group, and also be a kind of a positive experience, and make it okay to say like, oh no, you're supposed to be a little bit far away, so those are other ways we can give people permission to, say something about staying away. Yeah,
excellent point. Do you want to say anything about face touching, or should we move to questions?
I think like the biggest thing with face touching is just trying to help people notice it. We usually don't notice it. And so you can make it easier to notice it by making your senses more aware of it. So I wrote in the blog post, like putting a bandage on your finger so you'd be more likely to feel it, or putting a bell around your wrist so you would hear it. I saw someone post on Twitter that you should hold an onion in your hand, and then every time you'd bring your hand to your face, you would smell it. And so I think just making it easier for people to notice it initially will help you change the behavior. And then the most common procedure that people use is self-monitoring. So just, making a check mark every time you do it, and then you'll probably see it go away over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Well, so here's a question that we have that has come up a couple of times here. If you've got an environment that is kind of panicky, so the person says that can be disruptive, right? So panic and information and excess are part of the environment, disturbing and affecting the right behavior. So you've got this societal problem that's kind of panic and too much information. In fact, one of my clients told me he was at the grocery store the other day and he saw a woman carrying a big pack of toilet paper, and someone ran up to her and took it and ran away. I know, right? Toilet paper. So there's panic that's going on. Fortunately, it's not massive, large scale panic behaviorally, right? It's just kind of emotional panic at this point, which is damaging, but it's not hurting people. People aren't hurting each other generally, right? We haven't seen that. So that's fortunate. But at work, we've got information overload and some panic going on there. What do we do to combat that?
It's a great question. I think one thing that I've seen people do is just give people a space to talk about it, and I've seen people like have a Zoom meeting for a half hour in the morning where people can pop in and say, here are my concerns today, and they can come up with some solutions to address it. And so I think that's one good strategy. I think the other good strategy is probably just being a little bit more flexible right now with how people are working. Everyone is having different struggles, right? And so letting people have some control over how they adjust the way that they're working, the more that we feel a sense of control, I think the less stressed that we are. The research would point to that. So those would be good strategies. And then I've seen people, I'm not a mental health expert, but I've also seen people sharing different links to things about mental health, like here's a mindfulness exercise and stuff like that. So giving people some places, some levers to press to help them deal with the stress and anxiety that they're feeling.
Yeah, really good. Bob, if you want to jump in, feel free. I would add, communication can help, right? So, I think one of the things that has been very effective in this whole deal is that there are about like 4 primary recommendations that have been made, and there's one top one. And when I describe it that way, almost everybody on here and anyone you ask could tell you what those things are, right? Like social distancing is the top for sure, but we've also got hand hygiene, we've got face touching, we've got stuff like that, right? They've been so simplified and so repeatedly communicated that in a matter of weeks, that message has gotten out, right? And so that's the model, I think, for like communicating behavior change. We need to make it simple. We need to make it clear. And of course, we're talking about ways that like there's confusion around each of these, but at least people kind of have the beginning of awareness around what they are. And so you can start to behaviorally define what you want to see from people, but doing it in a simple, clear way and communicating often. These are really good practices, and they can reduce panic, and they can increase kind of the positive direction for people to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, John, I'd add to that around the communication of your. So what I've seen suggested, and what I found helpful for me to stop my over panic and over anxiety take hold is to limit my watching of the news or reading or actively searching for stuff around this topic. So I need to be informed, obviously, because this is serious. And in the UK now, we have our Prime Minister does a briefing at 5:00 every day, and that's the only bit I watch, apart from just a quick check in the morning that nothing has changed. And I found that to be very helpful. Initially, when this was kicking off, I was spending far too much time on Twitter, far too much time listening to podcasts, ramping up my information, but then it came a bit too much and a bit too obsessive. And so I think limiting your exposure to the news, where you've got a trusted source, so you find a source that you trust that has to be objective and not politicized, and then you limit your exposure to that to get the facts, the updates, because things are changing, so we need those updates, and they are very good at reiterating exactly those points you've said about how to wash hands and the current status of the situation.
Yeah. Thanks. So around the topic, James just wrote a chat question. Do you feel that due to the information changing so quickly that it's difficult to change behaviors as it's a moving target? I think that I'll start here. I think that there's been some of that, the moving target, but we do know from day one or early on, people have been talking about social distancing. I think initially they were talking about hand washing, if I remember correctly. And that's still an element, right? And ding, and yeah, I mean, so that's still an element. So in my view, I don't think it's changed dramatically, but maybe you can elaborate on what you mean by that. I do think that there are many things changing. Conditions are changing, and so like the business impact is changing daily, multiple times a day in many clients, and so that's why people are who I'm talking to are meeting regularly by Zoom or by phone, but they're talking twice a day for at least an hour each time, and they're talking about the business impacts and the things that they need to do to kind of keep things running. And so it's that regular communication and then discussing how they need to communicate to the employees and other leaders as well, and what they need the other leaders to do in terms of that communication. So I think it's that frequent communication and that behavioral communication that really makes all the difference.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually think right now, given the fact that our environments have changed so much, our behavior is probably a little more flexible than it normally would be. So if anything, I think that it might be easier to change some of these behaviors right now because there's so much that's shifting in our environment. So yeah. I wanted to comment on this question that I saw about people taking temperatures as folks come to work and trying to figure out their health condition. And I think this actually goes back to what Bob was saying before about giving people permission to tell you that they're sick. And so if you have a work environment where there's a lot of focus on making sure you're there every day, maybe that needs to change a little bit, where we tell people, look, I really want you to stay home if you're sick or if a family member's sick. If there are ways, if people are worried about not getting paid, if there are ways for them to at least earn some money from home. So maybe not all of their job can be done if they're working from home, but parts of it could be done from working from home. That could be a kind of compromise on that. But I think we need to try to make it easy for people to tell us when they can't come to work.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And, it really gets back to what we call psychological safety or emotional safety. That's something that we talk about in our courses and how to create that environment. It's really the leaders creating the environment for people to tell the truth. And, it's not new in the area of safety, right? I mean, because we struggle to get people to report near misses and close calls, and sometimes even first aids and full-on injuries. And so you've got to be able to think about it from the person's perspective and find out, like, can we remove the barriers and the punishers for telling the truth about this? Mm-hmm. And I think your point is spot on, Nicole, about looking at pay, and that may be a deterrent for people to talk about this. It's going to cost me money to tell you, maybe I won't, maybe I'll get better.
Yeah. And it's a tough time for every business, right? Not everyone can pay people, but if there's ways to work it out so there's, less of a loss or something for them, that might help.
Yeah. Excellent. Two related questions here in the Q&A that I'll bring up here. Nick asked that, our track and ops staff have lots of pressure to keep the job going so the country can still run. What can we do to keep them sticking to the rules and work safely during this time? And the other one was around, there might be a risk of workers cutting corners because there's a new urgency in the environment. And how do we combat this? Nicole, do you have any thoughts about that?
Gosh, I feel like this is a theme of this, but I really feel like it's the regular communication with people, telling them that, it's essential all the time for them to work safely, but especially now. And so just giving people permission to do it without a shortcut and having regular conversations about safety, asking them what their barriers are. There could be barriers like there's less employees there that day, and that could encourage you to take a shortcut. And so early, at the beginning of the day, what are your barriers or concerns related to safety, and talk about those, come up with some solutions, and then check back in later, see how it's going.
Yeah. Well, and you've got to do that all in the new environment of social distancing.
Yeah.
Which, makes it more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And difficult potentially. I'm brought back to the reminder that a lot of the work that we've been doing, Nicole and I and Bob too, over the past several years has involved getting leaders, managers, supervisors to have more effective supervisory conversations. And the reason that is important, I mean, there's tons of data. Well, not tons. There are a number of studies, I should say, that are really convincing, I think, that suggest that, safety behavior occurs as a function of the frequency and quality of the conversation that I have with my supervisor. And so, whether it's coronavirus prevention or if it's, work safety or quality or really any other result you want, it's largely a function of the conversations that I'm having day to day with my supervisor, right? Like, now there are other elements. There's training, there's skills, there's making sure that people have the proper tools and equipment. In fact, we've got a checklist that I created 20 years ago or so that has kind of taken off in various niches, called the Performance Diagnostic Checklist. I'm happy to share that with any of you guys if you'd like. You could probably Google it and maybe find it. But it's a whole list of questions that you can ask to diagnose the performance. And if your supervisors are trained in thinking behaviorally, not just frontline supervisors, but managers and leaders, if they're trained in thinking behaviorally, that's really what that checklist kind of makes you do. It makes you think behaviorally. Then you're able to have better conversations that uncover more of the barriers, right? And so I think the answer to the question, like, how do we keep them focused, is we need to talk to them and keep them focused, right? And allow them to vent frustrations and listen to them and solve any of the frustrations that you can, and tell them which ones you can't solve and the ones that we'll have to deal with and continue to struggle through, right? And have a dialogue. We know that the more there's a strong relationship between supervisor conversations and safety behavior. And we also know studies show that there's a strong negative relationship between major events and supervisor conversations. But there's almost no relationship between written procedures and major events. And I'm happy to share any of those studies with you guys too, if you'd like. But hopefully that helps. I don't know, Bob, did you have more to say about that?
Yeah, so the way I like to think about it is that it's like a set of scales. So there definitely has been an increase in urgency for a number of workers, and like Nick mentions, like rail workers specifically. But if you think about all those workers that, even in the ER or A&E, as we call it in the UK, the urgency of health professionals as well has increased. So therefore, that is a real risk, right? Because it's known, and yeah, there will be tons of studies that show that this environmental change of time pressure increases the risk of shortcuts. In fact, it increases shortcuts, not just the risk. Therefore, so you have to combat that like a set of scales. You have to tip, then you have to introduce another contingency that takes that out, takes that balance out and redresses the balance to that kind of neutral level. And that, as you said, that is the supervisor. It can be peer-to-peer challenge as well, though, if you've got a good set of team colleagues that again are up for at least recognizing that this is a risk. So a conversation, an honest conversation with them, saying, guys, do you recognize that you are at more risk because of this? Because the urgency will drive you to take shortcuts. Therefore, each of you need to look out for each other and call each other out. And do you give permission for this to happen, if you like? So we're back to this permission. We're back to working collectively, but from that position initially of having the honest conversation about this is an increased risk for all of us. It's, you can see it actually in everything, in the panic buying, in the how our behaviors have changed. There is this underlying sense of panic, scarcity, and change in environment that we need our other halves or our peers to help us stay level in this time.
Yeah, excellent. And all the things that Bob is talking about, I mean, are changes to the environment, right? And so when we say creating the right environment, that means looking carefully at what environment you've got and your workers are in and thinking about how can I impact that. It's probably not going to be, I'll just tell you, it's probably not going to be like sending them a mailer that says like, hey, you know, you should stop work whenever you want or whatever. Like, we give you free license. Well, that's okay, but that's probably not going to impact behavior. What's really going to impact behavior is the stuff that's in the local environment while they're working, right? And of course, we're talking about broad communications and large scale communications. Those things need to happen for sure to set the tone. But, you know, people really look to their peers and their supervisors for cues as to like how to properly behave in that local work environment. And so it really, a lot of it, the success of those things depends on that stuff. And that's what Bob's talking about. You know, the exact examples that we're giving in here may or may not work for you, but that's not the important point. That's why we keep coming back to an understanding of behavioral science and an understanding of the environment that people operate in. I just wanted to share one more thing here before we sign off, if that's okay with you guys. Well, I actually had a couple of things, but I'll kind of breeze through them quickly here. There are some best practices in communication, and I just want to share those with you. And some of this stuff is taken from an article written by Larkin, and it's called "You May Know Safety, but You Don't Know Communication." And I'm happy to share that with you, but you could Google and find it. It's a fantastic article, and it suggests that they did an analysis, and they found that around 4%, only 4% of people can understand the average safety email. And that's because they don't read at the proper grade level, or I should say, really, it's written at too high of a grade level. People read at the grade level they read at, right? But we need to write at the grade level that people can accept that information. We also know that the percentage of people who read an email is only around 30%. So it's quite low. So if you take that 30% and then you imagine only 4% of that 30 really understands what you wanted them to understand from it, we know that email is a terrible way of communicating. So if you wanted to boost comprehension, you use fewer words, you write in a lower grade level. They say 7th grade or so in the US. You add pictures wherever possible. You know, we might think that email is the least effective way to communicate, followed by maybe text. There's a continuum, right? Maybe then by phone, then by recorded video, then by live video. And maybe phone is actually better than recorded video. Maybe recorded video is down there closer to email. But there's a continuum of effectiveness when it comes to communication. And so keep that in mind. If you really need to communicate something and you want people to act on it, it needs to be personal. It needs to be kind of face-to-face or live video. And then daily updates can help to reduce uncertainty. And that's really what causes stress and anxiety among people. It's a lack of control and it's uncertainty. And so if you can improve their control and you can improve their certainty, at least even if you were to say, here are the things that we know and here are the things that we don't know, that improves certainty and it reduces stress. The last thing is I want you guys to be focused on getting resources. And so I'm sharing a few here, and Janelle, we can make them available to you guys if you're interested, but like things from the CDC. If you're in the US, they're kind of US centric, but the World Health Organization has them as well that are global. In the US, we've got OSHA, and these things probably are relevant globally as well, but there are recommendations. And then there are studies that, on incubation periods and stuff like that. So we think that the incubation period is around 5.1 days, and 97% of people show symptoms within 11.5 days. So having this information can help people who think they may be having some symptoms. But you don't use Facebook or even LinkedIn. Use recognized scientific sources. And then the last thing is, I want to say that I had a conversation with Bob Cummins today, and we're a couple minutes over, so I can't bring him back in right now. But it was around strategy, and it was like the conversation was something like, well, we're sharing with a bunch of techniques with you today, but you can't just rubber band a bunch of techniques together. You really got to have a strategy of what you want to accomplish. And so I just wanted to tell you guys about this course that we're offering right now. It's an online course. and it is called the Behavioral Safety Leadership Academy, and it helps you to learn behavioral science so that you can put together a bunch of these techniques and form a real behavior change strategy. It kind of walks you through a process where you'll do that. And so Janelle can post that link in the comments maybe, or in the chat, sorry. And if you've got further questions and you want to kind of troubleshoot some of the behavioral strategies that you've got going on, book a call with me. I'm happy to spend time with you on the phone or by Zoom. And Dr. Gravina will as well. And I'm sure that Bob Cummins will, and I can connect you with either of those guys as well if you'd like. So to keep on time here, we're happy to hang out for a little bit longer, but to keep on time, I'm going to sign off. And I want to thank Dr. Nicole Gravina for being here today and sharing all of her wisdom with us. I really appreciate you. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
And thanks to Bob Cummins for coming in as a participant and offering his input and his behavioral wisdom as well. So thank you, Bob. Question came up. We're going to hang out for a few minutes. If you've got to sign off, I understand, but we'll take additional questions if you guys want to hang out. You can, and we'll be glad to hang with you here. And there are a couple of questions I'm going to answer that were just written down. But for now, I want to say I'm really grateful that you guys came, and I hope that there was something useful in this presentation. Our whole goal and our why really was to give something to the community that we have to offer during this difficult time. And so, I believe in pulling together and helping each other in times of need. And so I know Nicole does too, and that's why we're volunteering our time to do this. I will make this presentation available, and I think probably we'll put this on YouTube, and we will send out a replay to everyone who registered. There were a number of people who registered, some of whom couldn't make it, and that's okay. We'll send out a copy, a replay of the video. When you get the replay of the video, if you know other people who could have benefited from it, please share it with them. It's all free. There's there are no strings attached. We want to share the information. If you have feedback for us about things that you wish we would have covered, we're open to doing more of these and doing them in different formats and stuff like that. So if you think something else would have been helpful, I'd love to hear it from you guys. Communicate with me and let me know what you think. Okay, so here's a question. What type of methods can be used to calm down workers? Here in my city, a group of 25 workers walked off site due to fear of contracting the virus. That's an excellent question, and I think I'll just start off by saying that I think that communication is important. Like someone might choose to walk off a site if they didn't feel safe, right? And so I think your responsibility in a construction world is to create a safe environment as best you can for people, right? So that they can do the work, but they can do it safely. And that's physically, but also when it comes to illness. So, if you've got procedures and processes in place to keep people social distancing and to have them wash their hands and to do the work safely, then I think communicating that to them and speaking with them individually to convince them that you have their best interest in mind and you really want them to continue working so that they can earn a living for their family and finish the job too, that's important. And so I think it's those conversations. There isn't a magic bullet, and there isn't some like magic video that you can make and send it out to everyone that will convince them, right? Because getting people to read email or watch a video is difficult. Having a conversation is not so difficult. It just requires a little bit of courage and a little bit of planning. Nicole.
Yeah, John, I was going to add to that also that if you could ask people what their biggest concerns are, it might be some things that you've already addressed or that you could pretty easily address. And so maybe just, trying to learn from them, what are their biggest concerns and fears and how can you address that in the workplace might be helpful.
That's a great idea. Yeah, so even in a survey, you could do that through a survey. You could do that through just, video chatting with people or phone calls with people and kind of get a list of those things and then start to address them to the group. Fantastic idea. In fact, in our course, we have one exercise that we ask people to do that involves going out and asking people what frustrates them about the work environment. It's a really good exercise to build trust and to learn in ways, learn about things that you didn't know before. So, do we have any other questions? We're happy to hang out and continue answering your questions. I know Nicole has to sign off, and so she's going to have to go. But I really appreciate her being here, and thank you to Nicole for spending your time with us today. Thanks to the rest of you guys for coming. I really do appreciate you guys. I'm grateful to have you here, and thanks. I'm getting lots of thanks in the chat, and so thanks back at you. I appreciate you guys. And reach out if you've got additional questions. And when we share the video, share it out with people. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Super grateful that you came, and hopefully we were able to provide some helpful assistance when it comes to behavior change and behavioral science. I'm Dr. John Austin for Reaching Results and the Behavioral Safety Leadership Academy. All right. Thanks, everyone.